Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Viewscreen podcast, where I, Viztee, am chatting with Overlite.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be continuing our talk about episode 2 of the Battlestar Galactica miniseries.
I just want to point out that they don't swear. They say
Yes.
I completely frack, which threw me so hard.
I honestly didn't even notice it this time.
What?
Because after I've watched it so much that oftentimes I binge watch the show, and then for like the few weeks afterward, instead of saying fuck, I just say frack instead, and I'm like, oh,
that's fracking ridiculous.
Fracking toasters. And I just slip into it, and this time I'm gonna say I've watched the show so many times that I just didn't even think about it at all. It completely just passed me by. But yeah, it's to get around the get around any rating issues.
Yeah.
There's no bobs. There's no vag. There's no fuck.
But there is bra. Lots of bra.
Lots of bra.
Bit of ass.
Bit of ass. You can always have some ass on your television, but no fuck.
Before we do like plot, I just sort of glancing through my notes. One of the interesting ones for this episode was religion. Comes in a lot.
Yes.
There's a lot of not only like religious references, but just people doing religious things like praying and talking about it.
The humans believe in the Lords of Kobol, which are like sort of Zeus and Hera.
Well, they don't tell us this. They just say the Lords of
etc.
Lords
Yes,
of Kobol.
I mean in these episodes they don't talk about that, but it sort of expands a bit more as like a in the future, that sort of thing.
That's
and
main series
the Cylons, very briefly throughout the 2 episodes, mention a god. They just say God. They don't say gods.
Well, one of them
or the Lords of Kobol.
One of them goes into
they say
slightly more once.
Yeah, they specifically only ever say God, like God will punish you for your sins or something.
Yeah.
And it's very singular.
I mean,
which is
I didn't really notice that much this episode, but
I think that gets leaned into a bit more, but it's definitely the seeds have been planted, at least, whether they're super noticeable or not.
But it's,
I think when you look back, you're like, that makes sense.
It's a big difference between this first episode and the second one, where suddenly people are like praying for other people and just talking about their gods and like bringing it up.
Where, the calamity suddenly brings about a burst of faith.
Yeah, and I think the first thing I noted was, I think the first one to do any sort of have a religious moment was the Cylon, the blonde bombshell. And so I was like, okay, so if they're religious, they must be a Cylon.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So every time someone is like doing a religion, the first 3 or 4 times I'm like, Cylon? Are they? Is this a Cylon? Okay. I feel like I basically treated this like a game of Among Us, where I was just constantly like,
You're the imposter.
It's them.
No, you.
There they are.
You're the jester, Gaius. No, you're the imposter. Oh my god.
Right, should we get into the sort of?
Yeah, I was going to say, on the topic of religion, so we find out coming into the second. I think we're going to go a little bit quicker through the second episode because we have waffled on quite a lot, but we've talked about the setting. I think the episode picks up with Lee and the ship, the Colonial, what is now Colonial 1, because it's got the president on it, picks up with them and their alleged death. And you find out that they're alive, they're perfectly fine, and Lee has used a theory that they were toying with in War College about popping an EMP to make it look like there was a nuclear explosion, like on the sensors.
I know we're waffling, but this bit did really bother me because he was like, "Oh, I toyed with it in college."
Yeah. We did something we discussed in War College, but it never worked on the Sims.
Yeah, it never worked on the Cylons in the simulators. They always just saw straight through it. And I was like, this is either an important plot point or they're ass pulling a little bit just to have.
I'm not going to say anything.
And like, they could have just not said it. They could, it didn't even need to be like a war theory. I would not have cared. But they chose to be like, they chose to comment on it. And I hope that is something.
I'm going to withhold any form of statement until maybe we've watched some more of the show.
Yeah. I am going to go back to my first page of notes. The 5th line is, Cylons never left, ? Which I think is a possible. I think it's highly possible, but there's no actual credence to it. It's just an idea.
And then we find out that they're alive, and they're like, well, back to finding people. And Boomer and co, they meet up with them.
Yeah.
And they start looking for more ships, and that's kind of all that matters with them for the rest. For now.
So they've now got the president, Captain Lee Jr.,
Captain Lee,
Pilot Boy, Boomer, and Gaius, the supercoder, and also and then his blonde bombshell hallucination.
So like that's 4 of the main characters, and 5, because including the not real Cylon.
Yeah.
And they're all on that one ship, and they're looking for other ships with survivors on, and ultimately, they have to choose to sacrifice some that don't have jump drives to escape.
Yeah, they gather a convoy of like 50,000 people.
Yeah.
And they end up being forced. And I find this really interesting because the previous episode ends with them choosing to stay to try and save people and getting attacked by Cylons. And then this episode, they choose to leave, and they leave like a third behind, I think.
I don't think it was that many. I think it was a couple of thousand. I think they have like 50,000, and they leave a couple of thousand behind. So they escape with like 40-something thousand people, right?
Yeah, and I think there was a particularly harrowing scene where they are basically coordinating the jump over radio.
Yeah.
And at the same time, those people they're leaving behind are like constantly radioing and begging.
Yeah, go, please tell us where you're going. We'll drive there at sublight because we'll get there. And they're like, oh, we can't tell them where we're going because they might give it away to the Cylons if they get captured. And then some of the other ship pilots are like, oh, Lords of Kobol, hear my prayer for those we leave behind.
Yeah, and then the Cylons appear, and there's a radio line that's like, oh my god, they're Cylons. And I don't know why that one particularly got me good, was just like the realization. And then I think the last line is like, you'll rot in hell for this, and that one I didn't like as much, because it just doesn't hit as hard when they're like, we'll get you back.
Yeah, I hope you all die. It's like, but we're trying to save the human race.
Like...
So yeah, great, thanks, I guess.
Sure.
And then I think back on the Galactica, we see Kara, ace pilot. She lands after her little fight with the little skirmish they have with the Cylons in the previous episode, and she's like, "Where's Prosner, the Cylon that Overlite thinks is a Cylon? He's got to fix my gimbal on my ship. It's all wibbly wobbly." And they're like, "Prosner's dead, and we lost 89 other crew members." And she's like, fucking Colonel Ty, that bastard like that. And then Chief Terrell's like, "Hey, did you hear about Lee?" And she's like, "Well, what about Lee?" And he just like gives her the look, and so then she's real pissed because she really likes Lee. She was banging his brother.
And I'm questioning if she's a Cylon this whole time.
Yeah, and so she's pissed. And then they're in the Galactica. They're getting ready to do a hyperlight jump, which hasn't been done on the Galactica because it's a fucking museum for years. And they're all freaking out, like, "Oh, we shouldn't do this. Are you sure you want to do this? This is madness. Are you sure you want to do this?" So they start prepping this jump, and it's very tense the whole time, and they're super nervous about it, and they successfully complete this jump, and they're all like, "Woo!" Everybody's clapping, cheering on the ship that they've survived this single jump, showing like how risky it is every time, which I really like.
Yeah. I do want to point. There's one character who's this like really quiet, kind of awkward engineering girl, who just kind of is always there.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
never
She's
says
one of the
anything.
but sort of main secondary characters of the show.
Yeah, I mean, we never get her perspective. In these episodes, at least. And she's portrayed, I think, as a little bit weird, but also glossed over a little bit. And she drops the line, "I hate this part," and I was like, Cylon? Is this? Do they hate FTL? We don't know.
That, interesting. I'm just gonna like keep saying things to just like not give anything away. And so yeah, I think that's they arrive at a Ragnar station, which is a station where the munitions are. I'm kind of just trying to speed run the episode, really.
Yeah.
In case you've got any like things to throw in.
I think we can just come back. I'll just like after you've speed run the plot, we can just go.
Oh yeah, I suppose that works. And they get to the munitions depot, and one thing I really loved about the munitions depot bit, maybe I should come back to this. I don't know. They get to the munitions depot, and there's a dude there already who looks pretty ill, and he's like they board the station. Chief Tyrrell and a bunch of Marines and some engineers. They go onto the station. It's abandoned, but it's got stocked with munitions in case they need them for a war, and it's in a nebula that fucks Cylons up, and it keeps it hidden. And they go in there, and there's this pretty ill-looking dude, and he's got a gun, and he's like, "Back away, this is my loot." And they're like, "Listen, there's a war on. We need this shit. We don't care about you. Just put your fucking gun down and fuck off." And he's like, "No, you think I'm falling for that? What war? What are you talking about?" And then one of my favorite bit is Tyrrell goes like, "Listen, okay?" Because he's trying to talk him down and it's not getting anywhere. So he goes, "Listen, all right, okay? There's 2,000 people on this ship behind me. And if you think you can kill every single one of us, then go right ahead. If not, get the hell out of my way." And I love that because it was just like, he's just like, fucking, I don't give a fucking shit. You ain't shooting all of us. And so you're going to just put your fucking gun down and let us carry on with our job. And I love that so much. It's such a great way to like talk someone down. So then this dude, he chills out and he's like just chatting to them all. And the commander comes along and he's like, what's going on? What else is on this ship then? What's back there? And he's like, just stuff. And then while they're chatting, a live explosive goes off because they fuck up moving the gear. And the commander in armor of the Galactica has to jump into this sort of back room quickly with the ill guy, and the door gets fucked up, and they survive the explosion, but they're trapped in this room, and they have to find a way out together.
Just the two of them.
The two of them.
This stranger and
stranger
now
who's
admiral.
Very ill. Yeah, and well, he's not an admiral still. He's still the commander, but he's in charge of. He's the fleet. The commander of the fleet.
The commander of the entire fleet, which at this point is basically just the Galactica.
Yeah, but they have said, hey, any ships finding this, come and rendezvous at Ragnar.
Yeah.
Basically, they put out the call. And let's see.
They go on their little adventure.
Yep. They're on their little adventure together, and slowly the guy starts like questioning, humanity and like everything. This ill guy, and he's like saying stuff like, he starts slowly planting the seeds in Adama's mind that this guy, he's a bit sus.
Yeah.
He's a bit of a weird one. He's very ill for some reason. He says it's his allergies.
He gets more and more sick as time goes on.
But he seems to get more and more sick as time goes on, and he's saying all these things like shitting on humanity and saying like, "Oh, it's not the Cylon's fault," and all this kind of stuff. And eventually, Adama clocks on that this guy's a Cylon somehow, even though they have no idea that Cylons look like humans. He eventually he's confronts him, and he's like, "Oh, it's the silica pathways in your brain melting down because of the nebula." And the Cylon guy's like, "Well, it's okay, because when I die, I'm gonna get uploaded into a thing, and I'm gonna tell the Cylons exactly where you are." And they have a little skirmish,
And Adama calls him on the bluff, though. He's like, you probably would have left already if you could have. Because, I mean, you're not looking pretty hot, and you already know where we are. So, like,
yeah,
they have a little scuffle.
Yeah, and
I mean, that's where we get to
one
see...
really nice part is the Cylon parrots Adama's speech back to him that he gave about humanity.
He does?
Yes, he mentions a line from Adama's speech. Oh, he says, "You cannot play God and wash your hands with the things you've created. Sooner or later, the day comes where you can't hide from the things you've done anymore." And one of those parts, the Cylon basically, I think it's straight up verbatim, just repeats it back to him. But it might be slightly different. But it's basically the same thing, and Adama's like, "What the fuck?" And this is when he's about to die, the Cylon. And they have a little skirmish, and the Cylon dies, and Adama gets a little fucked up. And he finds his way out back to the ship. And at that point, the Laura, Roslyn, the president, and Lee, and everybody have made it back to the Galactica. And they're having...
everyone is together at this point.
Everyone's now together. And they want supplies for all the civilians, and they want the Galactica to remain behind and look after the civilians. And Ty's like, "I'm not giving you shit. We're here to fight a war." And he's like, "I'm only going to give you some stuff because Lee, you're still alive, and the commander's going to be happy that you're alive. And that's the only reason I give a tiny shit about what you're asking me right now." So they get some supplies for the civilian ships, and then the president's just kind of organizing all the civilians and stuff. One bit I think is very important. Okay, so before it's sort of coming to the bit now where it's wrapping up towards the end of the episode, but one thing that happens is Gaius is the super genius. He's on the Galactica.
I love this so much.
He's typing, he's making sure that there's no references to his program that eventually essentially destroyed the entire fleet on the Galactica. And while he's doing so, he is daydreaming about the lovely, sexy lady. Yes. And at one point has a little daydream that she's, giving me a little quickie, a little cheeky, sexy time. And then the man, we do know his name. It's Doral, the red shirt guy who is, he's the museum running fellow. He's back on the ship, and he is helping organize stuff, and he comes up to Gaius, and he's like, "Oh, are you okay? You're looking a little flushed. Oh, here's the things that you asked for." And Gaius is like, "I'm fine, thank you." But he's clearly pissed off with this guy interrupting his daydreamy, sexy time. And he's like, "Ooh, we need to implicate somebody." And they see the Cylon in his brain. Is she a Cylon? His brain Cylon, real or not, points out a thing that he's seen on the Dradus board, on the main tactical array of the Galactica, which is something that she had in her bag that he's seen before.
Device.
Yeah, some sort of strange Cylon device. So he's like, I need to implicate somebody as a Cylon.
Because we don't know, they don't know that Cylons look like people yet.
Yes, only the commander does, and Gaius does. Because he's been fucking one, and she told him, and the commander's just had a fight with one. So he's like, okay, I've got to find a way to implicate him as a Cylon so that I can blame him for the Cylon device so we could take it down because it's clearly bad news. And then, so he gets in, the commander gets back on, invites Gaius to a meeting, and there's only a few of them, and they're like, "Okay, so here's the deal. This guy's a Cylon, okay? So I need you to science it out and figure out how to test other people or something." And so he's like, "Brilliant. I can frame this random guy." Brilliantly, he's wearing a red shirt the entire time, and I was like, "Oh, he's just a red shirt. He's gonna get."
Is he actually?
Yeah, he got a red top, and I was like, "Yes, he's a red shirt. He's getting written off." And so Gaius frames this guy who swears he's innocent for being a Cylon, points out the thing on the Dradus console, and they remove it, and it's all happy times. And they leave this guy behind on the station, and there's a beautiful battle scene. I don't know if you want to discuss Overlite, the battle.
Well, I just want to go back to the Gaia stuff for a second.
Okay,
Because
yeah.
there is a particularly beautiful moment where he's figuring this out, and he's like, yeah, because nobody knows that humans are Cylons yet. And it hard cuts to the two old guys being like, so it turns out that Cylons look like humans now.
Yeah, then it's the famous quote. I think might be in one of the.
He's like, so they look like us. They could look, they could look like any of us. And then later when the three of them are together, I think he's like, any one of us could be a Cylon. And I was like, that's the line. He said the line. Oh, this is great. I'm so excited. Also, this whole time, so they are going into battle, sort of at the climax of this episode. But this whole time, once they land at the anchorage and the other people come to the anchorage, it's established that if you spend too long in here and you are a Cylon, you're gonna start like sweating a lot. But they don't know how long. And
because the guy who dies, he's been there for possibly months. Like, we don't really have any reason to go on, because he says he's been there for months. But we don't have any reason to believe it.
Could be months. He
could have been on the Galactica and hopped off the ship before them somehow. They have no idea at all.
Yeah. So there, in this whole time, I once again am scanning the room for nervousness, sweaty brows, possible, any sort of hints. And I did note Billy, who is the curly-haired assistant of the president, seemed a little clammy.
Okay.
And so did Leah Dharma, the son of Admiral, Captain.
I love this. Lee is a Cylon train. You're going really hard on it.
I'm not going incredibly hard on it, but there's certain characters, and it's mostly the couples. I ended up really sort of, I think, focusing on the couples being Cylons, because also when Gaius is looking, sort of is just hanging out, and the blonde bombshell comes along, and she's like, "Look, do you see anything familiar?" And he looks, and the camera pans over Billy and Duala, who I earlier was like, they must be Cylons because they looked at each other funny. But they are together, and she's like, do you see anything familiar? And it pans over them, and they're like kind of out of perspective, as if they're not important. But me, in my brain, I'm like, this could be a like huge hint that she was pointing out them, or not that she was pointing out them, but it's like a I think it's a common like technique, I don't know how common, where you have a character say something that is alluding to something obvious, but they're in the background or slightly out of like focus in the foreground is this other thing that also matches the description. And I'm like, are those two Cylons? Is one of them a Cylon? Because we also have this other scene. Sorry, it's just big Cylon hours. We have this other scene with those two, the curly-haired assistant and Duala, who is like the navigator or something. Is she some kind of navigator? She's like a communications.
She's the like comms officer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. She's like communications. She randomly kisses him, just out of nowhere, and I'm like, wow, they're falling in love. But I'm also like,
the last time I saw someone randomly kiss someone was the start of episode 1, and it was a Cylon.
Yeah, and that was when I saw those two people making out, and that person that was having hot, funky Cylon sex now has maybe a Cylon in their brain. So maybe it was a power move by her, because she knows she's not going to be around for long, because she's got some kind of Cylon mouth-to-mouth brain bullshit. I'm like, I don't know, but I'm just shooting out a lot of roots here.
Oh my gosh.
Right, I think I'm not sure if there's any other immediate. We do get also this sort of pause in the episode before they go out to fight this Cylon fleet that has shown up.
Oh yeah, it's very important.
They're all sweet loving. It's basically like, I think there's like some religious. I wrote he's religious, but I have no idea who I was referring to at this point. But we get like basically just a big makeout scene. The curly haired guy and the comms officer, they're making out the NG I wrote, who's like the head engineer, and Boomer,
and
the hauling
Boomer.
person. Boomer makes it back, and they meet each other, and they're like, "Oh my god!"
Mwah.
And then we have the ace pilot and Commander Lee Apollo, Adama. They meet back up, and they have like a heart to heart. It's not quite sexy times, but it's like getting things. It's like very It's kind of on that level of like.
Yeah, it's definitely. Is there something going on there? Who knows?
Yeah.
And
then I think I wrote that those two are safe for some reason. For some reason, there's something in that scene, I don't remember what. And I'm like, well, they can't be Cylons now, but it might be like some history thing that they have. Like they both have old history or something.
Yeah.
And then sorry, I've got more. I've just spotted more in my notes. So Gaius says to the blonde bombshell, he's like, "We've been having sex for 2 years," and I'm like, you know what else is 2 years? How long our good friend Lee Apollo Adama has been gone. He's been gone for 2 years. What a suspiciously convenient number, huh? And we're gonna find out later why I will write this theory off as irrelevant. But we can continue.
Well, I was going to say, because you mentioned the brief pause, there was a nice bit where the commander and the president have another like standoffy kind of thing, but a lot more chill, where they're like, "No, we're not going to stay and protect the civilians. We're going to go and fight a war." And she's like, "The war's already over. We need to stay and protect the civilians." And then she goes, "We need to start having babies. That's the only way we're going to survive." And he's like, whatever, and like fucks off back to talk about war stuff. And then in the like scene after, there he's talking to like he's got Lee there, he's got Ty there, he's got Gator, Lieutenant Gator there, and they're having a meeting about how they're gonna strategize, because they found out there's a big fleet of Cylons outside, and they're like, "How are we gonna get out of this thing? We can't jump out. We have to leave this nebula first before we can make the jump." And they're strategizing, and Adama, whilst they're talking, he like zones out and he looks over and he sees Billy and Dee having a conversation, and he randomly goes, they've got to start having babies.
And they better start making babies.
Yeah, and then they Ty and Lee look over, and Ty goes, "Is that an order?" Which I really love.
And he's like, I think he's then like, It might be one soon.
It might come to that. Yeah, it's like and then so that's where he softens up a bit.
Yeah.
The commander. We were talking about it at the start, like earlier on. We were how he softens up as the 2 episodes go on, and that's him like.
And like he's changed a lot. Like he's gone from this old codger who doesn't who's like just an old fogey and it's stuck in his ways to like he's changed a lot, and he's become a lot more like about.
He's like ship dad now.
Yeah, kind of.
And he's fleet dad, and he wants to look after all of his fleet children. And so he's like, we're gonna escape with the civilians. So we're gonna take the ship out, and we're gonna sit down. We're gonna take enemy fire until all the civilian ships are away, and then we're gonna leave too.
Yeah, but I find that really interesting, because in the previous episode, the military side of things, the Galactica, does all the like. It vents the engineers. They make all the hard decisions. They choose to let people die in order to save more lives, and the president chooses to try and save the lives at the risk of losing everything. And then in the second episode, it's the president who is cutting the losses and choosing to leave people behind and sacrifice them so they can preserve the remaining 50,000 or however. And it's the Galactica. Adama, who is choosing to, instead of like, because what they end up doing is he's like, we're gonna protect the civilians as they flee, and then we're gonna bring all of the fighters back in, and we're gonna jump, which obviously is like a lot more risky than just say leaving the fighters and jumping.
Yeah, and he's like, bring all of my pilots home.
Yeah,
which is immediately you're like, that's a bit of a sort of. Not Chekhov's gun, but like that's one of those phrases where you're like, somebody's gonna get left behind.
And you know what's great about that? In the opening scenes of the battle, about 5 fighters get blown up immediately.
Yeah.
5 random fighters just get
Yeah.
rocketed into oblivion.
And there's this beautiful fight with a whole load of battleships. And what I love is in like a lot of sci-fi or into like Star Trek and stuff, you have like the Enterprise faces off against one ship, and there's no little fighters, and they fire one laser beam at each of the shields. Whereas in this, it's like there's swarms of fighters from both sides, and there's missiles firing from both sides. It's a much more like a sort of Earth ship battle.
Yeah.
And the Galactica's firing flak. It's got this flak cone in front of it, and it's just doing this big zone of control flak. So no ships can fly into it because they'll get blown up. Missiles, they hit it, they blow up. And it's like this big zone of protection for the ship. And it sort of cuts off a bit of the combat zone, and it's super cool.
The fight oh my gosh, the fight is so good because it's like it's kind of divided into some like stages where it's like the opening scenes of the fight, it's just the Galactica like firing out this flak, and you watch as all of the like missiles and shots and cylons are like flying towards it, and they enter that cone and they're just getting like eviscerated, and then they start backing off, and then after they back off, this whole time the drums are pounding. It's like super intense, and then they like there's this tense moment of like, is this going to stop them? And it manages to, and they're like, deploy the fighters, and then all the fighters go out, and the fighters are scrambling, and they're like flying around and fighting for their lives, and the civilians are starting to like leave out, and then you've got this like, you know, I can't remember exactly how it continues, but eventually all the civilians leave, and I think Adama gets hit, and they're like, bring all the fighters home, it's time to go, and all the fighters come back, but Adama and Starbuck,
except Lee Adama and Starbuck,
they're left out there, and Starbuck does this absolutely ridiculous maneuver.
Even before that, there's a bit, so she's still fighting and like trying to protect Lee, and she's just, because she's such a fucking great pilot, she's just trashing all these Cylons, right?
Yeah.
And she's like completely in the zone, and a callback that we didn't really even mention in this little speech, a callback to the the very start, like pretty much of the first episode, is Commander Adama goes to Starbuck, what do you hear? And she replies, nothing but the rain. And he goes, well, grab your gun and bring the cat in. And they call back to that while she's flying in the ship. It brings her sort of back out of the focused firefight. And she's like, yep, I'm on my way home. And then Overlite.
There's this ridiculous scene. And I'm going to say it's ridiculous because she could be a Cylon. She effectively mounts her ship and the Lee Adama's ship. Like, she rams his, and they interlock, and she then proceeds to fly basically straight forward, maneuvering her ship like without computer aid, just completely like by pure raw skill. She flies both of their ships into the hangar, which is half closed and at like high speeds with like 2 ships. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, amazing, but also she's too good. How does a human do this? And like, I think
she's just that good.
I know. And like towards the end of the episode, there's a chat about how good she is. Ty, the second old guy, is like, you're one of the most amazing. You're the most amazing fighter pilot I've ever seen. You're so good. And in my notes, I just wrote "too good" in all caps and underlined it 6 times, just because I'm like, this is some Cylon level efficiency.
Oh my gosh. I think that's kind of it for like the battle. Apart from I just wanted to shout out obviously the music again.
Oh, it's so good.
Beautiful. And the camera work again. So like it uses that shaky cinema verite kind of shaky cam style and everything, but on the firefights in space too. Like, it's so fucking cool. Like, you're like bobbling along, shaking along with this firefight. It's just so nice. And it has these beautiful like tail camera kind of thing. Like when you're following the ships too, and it's just so incredibly well shot.
It's really good.
And considering it's like all CG too, it's insane that they've done so much work with the camera on. Like, you don't really see that sort of level of camera work with CG stuff. It's beautifully well done.
One of my notes literally is I love the shitty CGI.
Yeah, because the
really
CG
good.
like it's from 2003, so it's damn good.
It's damn good.
It's damn good. And then I think the episode kind of winds down. They all get away, and then I can't. We have a little wind down on the ship, right? Where Ty like is apologizing to Kara and saying she's a great pilot, and she's like,
actually, I think isn't it? Is it ship and then the speech and then ship again, or is it just the speech? Because there's a closing speech with.
There is a closing speech, yeah. I know that's that they've. Is that the very? I can't remember exactly the pattern. Just to go with the closing speech.
So there's a closing speech where I think I'm pretty sure actually it does immediately cut from the battle to this a priest who was introduced.
It's a funeral.
A funeral. Yeah. Who is like saying rights of the lords of Cabal, and we suddenly have a insight into how some of their sort of religion works. And then Admiral, I'm going to keep calling him Admiral because that's the only way I'm going to remember him.
He's not an Admiral.
Admiral Adama steps
up,
the
commander,
and he gives a little speech about how hard things may be, and then he talks of a third hidden colony that
the 13th.
13th, sorry,
colony.
Not third.
Yeah.
13th hidden colony that he knows where it is because only the very top fleet brass were given coordinates during the previous Cylon War because they were worried, and they're gonna go and find it, and it's called Earth.
It's Earth,
and
the 13th colony of Earth.
And they have this new hope, sort of renewed.
Yeah,
something
and
to aim for.
It's got the beautiful because they've got the so say we all. And he builds it up before he gives his speech, and then he gives his speech, and then he builds up the "so say we alls" and at the end, and then they all have a nice cheer and a bit of hope.
Yeah.
Renewed, leading into the rest of the series.
It's a very like that scene where he's sort of rousing the crowd. It feels like you could mark that as like the sort of catalyzing of if they were to end up being, an extremely militant society, you would be able to point to that scene and be like, this is one of the moments where they took a big step towards being like extremely like rigid, following rules because of like this Cylon threat. I don't know where the show is going to go. I assume it's going to continue down this sort of Cylon, dealing with Cylon narrative, but like if there was ever a look at like the sort of ideology, I guess, of the kind of people who go through that kind of thing, like them having rigid rules
the
on
show
how they behave,
and like, definitely follows like a sort of a sort of it looks at that as part of the show. It definitely comes up.
Yeah, but that is like one of the moments where like across the 2 episodes they have been sort of hardening and changing and getting more used to the environment and like kind of learning. And that point is where they all kind of come together and establish this group, kind of new group identity. Is sort of what you could call it.
The survivors of the human race, and they're looking for Earth. And that's like sort of sums up the plot of like leads into sort of the plot of the show, and that's what's happening.
And then we get the wind down scenes.
Oh, and the beautiful. Whoa. So there's a couple of wind down scenes on the ship, which is Kara and Ty, but there's a Cylon wind down scene. So,
me to do this? I feel okay.
Yeah. So obviously, well, obviously we know there's blonde, sexy Cylon, and we know there is the guy who's called Leoben, who was the sweaty guy on the station who Adama fights and kills.
Those are two.
So we know those two, and then they leave behind red shirt guy Doral on the station, and that's where the Cylons enter.
We got the Cylons breaking into that anchorage, is what it's called. They're breaking into the anchorage, and it slowly zooms in. I think we get a shot of the door being sort of burst open from the outside, and it zooms in to Doral, who is there, and he looks kind of like freaked out. And as it zooms in, you realize that he has the exact same symptoms that the weird freaky guy who was there in the first place had. And it is unveiled that he is, in fact, actually a Cylon.
Yeah, and so Gaius completely, by chance, you assume, correctly identified this other Cylon.
I mean, this is what really solidifies Gaius as the comedy character. Is not only is he having these like ridiculous scenes of like trying to talk to someone, but at the same time, this sexy woman is trying to make sense. It seems like something out of a cartoon. But then the person who he chose to frame turns out to be actually a Cylon. Like it is literally ripped straight out of a comedy cartoon. Like that is exactly the kind of thing you would see. But then what happens is many Cylons begin to file in the copies or other sort of duplicates. There's many versions of this blonde bombshell and this guy that the sort of weird guy that we found on the anchorage, and Doral, who is the sort of museum guide initially. And they all fall in there. They're kind of talking about how they got away, but we'll find them. They'll find them eventually. They can't run forever. And it pans
Space
over
isn't that big.
to this fourth character who is a different Cylon, and it turns out that Cylon is a duplicate of Boomer, the Cylon who very suspiciously had a perfect plan after that first fight of what to do when they got hit, and was nervous going into it, suspiciously nervous, and had the parallel of immediately getting hot and bothered after the Gaius blonde bombshell hot and bothered.
Yeah, see, I never picked up on that before, which I think is a very cool parallel that you've picked up on.
I forgot about those, and I'm so glad you made me make notes, because I was like, oh shit, I was very suspicious. Because honestly, in that moment, I was too like hyped up on the tension, and I was like, is the Admiral about to walk in? Who's about to walk in? Oh my god,
that would have been so spicy.
I would have been really pissed off, though, because every argument went against him being a Cylon.
Yeah. It would have been very, very insane.
But that scene, it's quite defining, I think, that final scene, because it does a lot of things at once. There is this grand mystery around the Cylons that is really sort of built up through these two episodes. There's a lot of work put into sort of only revealing certain things about them. We only meet two. One of them is like just randomly on an anchorage, and the other is like this very weird, like they behave very strangely, and so like the only two we've met, they act very weird. One of them has managed to like implant themselves into the brain. Maybe, who even knows of this genius turned cartoon character. Like it's very mysterious. We get no explanation. We do see some other Cylons, but they're like weird robot shooty person. I think the most insight we get is actually from the hallucinated blonde bombshell, who talks about sort of having her own plan. And she talks about like being in love, and she makes a reference to her god being love. And that's when she's like trying to seduce, or we think seduce, or just make out with, or mess with, or like, who can even tell? But that scene I think is particularly defining because that immediately before that, we have a scene with Admiral Adama, and he has a note that simply says there are 12 models of Cylon, and then we meet 4 of them. And what I feel is made immediately apparent is there's only 12 different like people. Like these are 12 different people, like they look like the same 12 people, just duplicated over and over and over again.
Yes. Yeah.
Like if you took 12 random humans and you duplicated them over and over and over again, and those are all of the like possible Cylon selections.
Yeah.
And so immediately, all of the theories about the star, the ace pilot, basically any character with a history with other characters is almost immediately written off, because why would they have duplicates of that one person? Just that, like, why would they have 1,000 Lee Adamas rolling around? Why would they have 1,000 versions of the president who has cancer?
Have 1,000 boomers. She's got a history with the crew. She's been on the crew. She's there.
How long?
Well, I don't know.
But like, the president has cancer.
She's on the crew. She didn't just show up in that episode. She was already part of the crew.
Yeah, but the old guy fought in the episode. The ace pilot has like a history with Lee Adama and like their
Commander
other
Adama
brother and the commander.
Yeah,
like they have such an intertwined history that it feels extremely weird for them to have to be Cylons, because it feels like it feels almost like you could verify them all the way back to their birth. Possibly, maybe you couldn't, but it gives the sense of like, you know, these two have known each other since like flight school or whatever the heck.
Yeah.
Like,
so, okay, so I think like sort of winding up, unless you've got any other points to throw in.
Oh my god, I have more.
Oh my god, really? I was gonna start asking you who you think might be the Cylon.
Oh, Cylon. No, yeah, Cylon thoughts. Cylon thoughts.
Yeah.
So there's more suspicions to throw around, is the thing.
And Overlite's sus.
There's a lot of Gaius really gives a lot of hints. So he has a conversation with I don't even know who he is. He's got like brown hair that's like there's a person on the ship who he has a conversation with, and it's about removing his contaminated code.
Yes, that's
right?
Lieutenant Gator.
Lieutenant Gator.
And yeah, he's like sort of in charge of the bridge, keeps a lot of the operations running on the ship.
That scene,
effectively kind of like the sort of 3rd or 4th in command of the ship.
That scene is incredibly suspicious because it is something that Lieutenant Gator says that seems to set off Gaius and his like hallucinations. Lieutenant Gator says a specific line that also kind of comes off of something that could be like code, like the way the wording of the sentence. I can't remember exactly what he says, but he says something that's particularly like, "Are we on the same level?" or something like that. And then suddenly the blonde bombshell is there, like, acting up. And I think from that point onwards is when she starts really messing with him and pointing him towards, like, framing someone else and messing with things. And also in that conversation, she is super distracting him. And Gaius is, like, looking off to the side. And he's like, oh my, whoa. And he's, like, barely able to hold a conversation. And he's, like, showing obvious signs. And there's this... They do show Lieutenant Gator's face for a little bit, and Lieutenant Gator is like, I think there's a little bit of a moment where he looks at him questioningly, but then the rest of the time he's kind of just like, yes, okay, yeah, like he's there present in the conversation, but the fact that he doesn't raise suspicion on Gaius is in itself incredibly suspicious. On top of the fact that he kind of set Gaius off and also has like no backstory. He's a real contender. Gaius is a big old contender. Not Gaius, sorry. Lieutenant Gator.
Yeah.
So that's one. Should I write these down or something? I don't know.
I'm writing them down.
You're writing them down. Overlite.
Yeah.
Predicts it. So Gator's a very, very big predictor, very likely prediction just because of that scene. I am actually incredibly suspicious of what is his name? Billy? The assistant to the president, who is just sort of always there. And he's just around, and he sometimes has things to say or to interject, or he's like, hanging out in the military area or getting lost, or like, he gets lost in the first episode and gets helped out by Duala. And in the second one, he's like, oh, I know the layout because I was here before. Conveniently. Like, I don't know, my dude. That's kind of raising questions. But then, like, him or Duala again is like, Duala was being kind of weird with just randomly kissing him. Like, that feels like a horny Cylon moment, because I feel like maybe the Cylons are just really horny. Like, maybe they just really want some action, and that might just be a weirdly common Cylon thing. Like, we're literally 2 out of 4, I guess, women Cylons being thirsty for it. Versus, human women being not as thirsty for it. Maybe it's just Duala for that reason.
Well, sure.
So I'm like semis. I think I probably just because Billy did less. I don't know. I feel like Billy and Duala are both very suspicious because they held roles that weren't, prominent. They just sort of played a part in other. It just seems like they did some suspicious things. They did enough to be, I think, like right after Mr. Gator, who is milling around a lot. Who else have we got? I'm gonna say both the Starbuck and Apollo are fighter ship duo. I think they're clear. I think the 2 old men are clear. I think the president is clear.
Okay.
I think
everybody else is on the chop. What about like some of the more main characters? What about like Chief Tyrrell? Who else is?
The engineer?
Yeah.
He's on the list simply because he was also in that scene immediately after the Cylon sex, where the 2 of them made out a lot. But the fact that Boomer is a Cylon, I don't know. I'm not sure if that makes me more or less suspicious of.
Okay. What about like Hilo, who was left behind on the planet?
Not a Cylon.
Okay.
Definitely.
What about,
I do not like unless Hilo shows up again. That would be an extremely high likelihood for Cylon time.
I'm trying to think who's the sort of main sort of the main
I feel like I've covered
this. I think that is most of the sort of big main people.
I feel like Hilo was a kind of similar to Prosna style of character, where they kind of had characters at the start and he was one of the people that were lost in the war.
What about like Callie, who is the girl who was one of the engineers who says the line, I hate this part.
Yeah. I mean, I think she's on there with the head engineer, because one of the maybe one of the engineers is sus. I think, like, I don't know. I feel like so they were talking about the code, right? That was harmed, and the fact that it was like it hadn't actually been loaded at one point. They just in that conversation they were like, it's never actually been loaded or tested at all. It's just there. I don't think that code. They had a copy. I don't think that code was what made the first fighter group shut down. I think it might either it was like Boomer's tampering, or like maybe an engineer has been tampering with some of this stuff.
I think that only there's a couple of other sort of side characters. There's the guy who works on the bridge, who we don't really get the name of, I don't think. But he's there when Ty orders Tyrell to like shut down kill the
And
100
all the crew.
engineers. Yeah, like he's one of the sort of, he's like third in command of the ship or something. He's like there.
Yeah, I don't
but you
even
never
remember what
find
he
out
looks
his
like.
name. Okay, he's a big guy. He's got like short hair. You know, kind of vibing.
Not a clue.
Okay, and then the only other person I can think of is the priest. I think they're like the sort of few sort of side characters too. I'm just throwing people at you.
Priest
just to sort
is
of,
not
to see
prominent enough to be. I can't make a single judgment on the priest because, I mean, yeah, they're like religious, but like I don't think there's been enough information for me to make any sort of judgment on that. Like, okay. They are a priest.
I just thought I'd throw some people at you in case you were like, you know, just to trigger any susses.
They did a religion. They must be a cylon. I can't believe it. How did I see this before?
Oh my gosh.
I think top of the list is Gator, and then the I've already forgotten. Good. You've written it down, right?
Billy D and Tyrell.
Sorry?
Yeah, Billy. You said Billy and D.
Billy and D, yeah.
And then maybe also Tyrell, but
the engineers are on the list just for the fact that there are engineering faults involved.
Oh yeah, okay, and Kelly, okay.
But like that's not really perfect.
Okay, amazing. Oh, well, I think at the end of the day, Overlite,
yeah,
as a fantasy enjoyer who hasn't watched much sci-fi, did you enjoy Battlestar Galactica, the first 2 episodes?
Yes. I mean, maybe it's because I was really invested in like breaking it down and spotting as much as possible and going like as hard as I can on like understanding what's going on a first watch.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good show.
Yeah.
I think the fact that it's a testament to when you can go sort of into detail with like the music and the scenes, and sort of the scene by scene like pacing, which I don't know, I think we actually talked about pacing, but that's hard. Or like the camera work, or like the writing, or the the sex, just going from the cylon sex to the cylon sex. But we didn't know that yet. Like that, fact that
I think that was very.
The fact that I was able to spot that as a big flag, and like I think it is kind of it's almost a luxury to be able to do that with a show, because you kind of have to. Some shows you can't do that with because they're just not very good, but you don't know that until you watch them, and sometimes it's hard to know if something is bad writing or good writing. I think the fact that I have had so much fun like looking at Battlestar Galactica just on that level, but then also like as a fantasy fan, I think it's a really good fantasy in terms of like sci-fi. Like it's really well grounded, like the rules are great. The story is just like oh it's great. I actually love it.
So originally, the premise of this podcast is: do we watch these things and then we're going to watch like a bunch of
doing something different next
sci-fi shows every week to see if Overlite would continue watching them. We've started off and instantly Overlite wants to watch the entire series.
We started with the best
we started
one.
Off so strong. I think we have started off too strong.
It's only downhill from here. Stop watching.
It might be downhill from here. Honestly, I can't think of many that have such a strong first few episodes. I mean,
it is a mini series. Like it's a 2-parter.
It is basically just
it's not
a
episode
big
1 of
movie
13
that introduces the show. Yeah, it is a very, very strong intro.
Yeah.
Do
the next episodes continue from these?
Yes, straight up,
wonderful,
instantly. Yeah,
I can't wait to watch those in months.
I mean, we don't know. We can figure out what we're gonna do. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's been so fun listening to you. Like I've watched them a lot, and it's been super fun listening to your perspective and who you think is sus, and me trying my goddamn hardest not to say anything suspicious to give anything away.
Well, that's the idea. Is I know very little about sci-fi. I've watched Doctor Who.
Yeah.
I watched 10 and a fair bit of 11. And I was watching Doctor Who before I watched this. I just, for some reason, decided to watch an episode. I don't know why. I don't think I've watched any sci-fi series outside of Well, I wouldn't even count Doctor Who. Like, I feel like I've not really watched a sci-fi series properly. If I have, I wasn't paying any attention.
Yeah. Well, it's been so good.
It has. I've enjoyed this very much.
I'm very excited. I was like, "Ooh, is this format gonna work?" And honestly, I think it's worked too well. We've gone. I think this honestly
too much fun.
When this comes down to the cut, I think this is going to be 2 episodes long.
I agree. I think this is going to be. We are going to probably have to cut episode 1 and 2 because, like, it might change how we do the plot, like synopsis. Like it might, depending on how long we want the episodes to be and how long we have, how much stuff we have to talk about.
I think this is probably one of the longer intros to a show.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think depending on how many episodes we watch of future shows and stuff, because this you had to watch both those two. You had to basically watch that 3 hours because that was a 2 episode long. Like, you didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed this. So
this was, honestly, I feel like just on a personal level, being able to yell about shows is like one of the best things in the world. And there's very few shows that I actually care about enough to yell about. So this was great. I enjoyed this very much.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you have enjoyed listening to this. I hope you've been, if you haven't watched Battlestar Galactica, if you're in the UK, it's on BBC iPlayer, so just go and watch it. It's incredible, and those of you who have watched it, I hope you've enjoyed Overlite's thoughts and theories as a first-time watcher, because I know I have. And we'll be definitely looking at more different sci-fi shows, and probably eventually looping back around to watch more Battlestar Galactica. So I hope to see you all next time. Thank you, everybody, for listening.